Hello, I'm Angela Marchion. This is my discussion on the cultural implications of racism and the impact it has on the poetry of Black writers. I have chosen the famous poets Langston Hughes and Gwendolyn Brooks for my assignment. I hope you enjoy. Allow me to start with Langston Hughes. Childhood. Langston Hughes was born James Mercer Langston Hughes on February 1st, 1902. When his parents divorced, he was sent to live with his grandmother, Mary Langston. Mary Langston educated him on the stories of his people and instilled in him a sense of pride in his ancestry. Because of this, she was often referred to in his poems. Education. Hughes began writing poetry in high school. Upon graduation, he moved to Mexico to live with his father. Hughes's father didn't believe writing was a good career and had offered to pay for college only if Langston studied engineering. After only 1 year, Hughes left Columbia University due to overwhelming racism at the school. While working odd jobs, he was able to travel the world from Africa to Paris. Influences. Langston was greatly influenced by Walt Whitman and Carl Sandburg. Langston's poem, I Too Sing America, is a direct response to Whitman's I Hear America Singing. Carl Sandburg's compassion for people and the injustices of life in America played a large part in Hughes's poetry as well. Poetry. Hughes' first book of poetry, The Weary Blues, was first published in 1926, with the help and recommendations by fellow poets like Vachel Lindsay and Carl van Vechten. His second volume, Fine Clothes to the Jew, was published in 1927. His most celebrated poems, written later in life, Let America Be America Again, and Harlem, What Happens to a Dream Deferred, continue to explore racial diversity and the struggles of America's lower class. Politics. Langston Hughes was fascinated by communism and figured it to be a possible alternative to segregation. He spent time in the Soviet Union, but when called upon in the United States for allegations of communism in the 50s, he denied interest. This led to his poetry and writing shifting away from political themes. Death. Langston Hughes died on May 22, 1967, from complications related to prostate cancer. His ashes are interred in a floor medallion in the foyer in the Stromberg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem, with the words from his poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. Here is The Ballad of the Landlord by Langston Hughes. Landlord! Landlord! My roof has sprung a leak! Don't you 'member I told you about it way last week? Landlord! Landlord! These steps is broken down! When you come up yourself, it's a wonder you don't fall down. $10 you say I owe you? $10 you say is due? Well, that's $10 more and I'll pay you to fix this house up new. What? You gonna get eviction orders? You gonna cut off my heat? You gonna take my furniture and throw it in the street? Mm-hmm. You talking high and mighty. Talk on till you get through. You ain't gonna be able to say a word if I land my fist on you. Police! Police! Come and get this man! He's trying to ruin the government and overturn the land. Copper's whistle. Patrol bell. Arrest. Precinct station. Iron cell. Headlines in press. Man threatens landlord. Tenant held no bail. Judge gives Negro 90 days in county jail. Langston Hughes' poem, The Ballad of the Landlord, deals with the theme of systematic racism and discrimination in lower-class housing, especially between black tenants and white landlords. Hughes is pointing out society's support of the rich and powerful with little to no concern for the needs of the lower classes. In this poem, the black tenant is demanding needed repairs and acceptable living conditions for his rental. The landlord only answers with demands for money. When the tenant threatens the landlord, the police are immediately called and the tenant is arrested and thrown in jail for 90 days. These actions inevitably result in the eviction of the tenant thereby freeing the unit and allowing another unsuspecting lower-class family to move in. It's a vicious circle perpetuated by racism and social divide. This is Gwendolyn Brooks. Childhood. Gwendolyn Elizabeth Brooks was born on June 7, 1917, in Topeka, Kansas. Her father once dreamed of becoming a doctor, but became a janitor in order to support his wife and children. Brooks's mother was a school teacher who taught at the Topeka school that later became involved in the Brown versus Board of Education racial discretion case. At 6 weeks old, her family moved to Chicago, a move that would impact her writing for the rest of her life. Education. Brooks attended various integrated schools where she faced much racial injustice. Over time, her experiences helped her understand the prejudices and biases, not only in her surroundings, but in every relevant American mindset. Brooks never pursued a four-year college degree because she knew she wanted to become a writer and considered it unnecessary. Instead, she graduated from a two-year program and worked as a typist to support herself while she pursued her career in writing. Influences. Gwendolyn's earliest influences came from growing up in Chicago. The characters from her works were often inspired by the city life. She was later influenced by Langston Hughes, James Weldon Johnson, and Richard Wright, who also wrote about the struggles of Black individuals and the racial injustices in society. Poetry. Brooks began writing poetry at an early age. She published her first poem in a children's magazine when she was 13. By the time she was 16, she had written and published 75 poems. When she was 17, she started submitting her works to the poetry section of the African American newspaper, the Chicago Defender. Brooks published her first book of poetry, A Street in Bronzeville, about growing up in Bronzeville in 1945. In 1949, Gwendolyn published her second book of poetry, Annie Allen, which focused on the life of a young Black girl growing up in Bronzeville. This book was awarded the 1950 Pulitzer Prize for Poetry, making Brooks the first African American to be awarded the prize. Activism. Early on, Brooks was involved in the NAACP's Youth Council, especially in the issue of lynching. As a Black woman poet, she spoke out on women's issues, motherhood, and balancing everything successfully. As a poet, Gwendolyn gave back to her Black community by donating money for literature prizes, sending Black writers to Africa for enrichment, and initiating the Gwendolyn Brooks Literary Awards. Death. After a brief battle with cancer, Gwendolyn Brooks died on December 3rd of 2000 at the age of 83. She remained a resident of Chicago's South Side until her death. She is now buried at Lincoln Cemetery in Blue Island, Illinois. Quick disclaimer. There is a word in the following poem in which I will not be reading aloud. I believe the word is offensive and said out of ignorance. Instead, when the time comes for the word to be dictated, you will hear a bleep. The Ballad of Rudolph Reed by Gwendolyn Brooks. Rudolph Reed was oaken. His wife was oaken too. And his two good girls and his good little man oakened as they grew. I am not hungry for berries. I am not hungry for bread, but hungry for a house, where at night a man in bed may never hear the plaster stir as if in pain, may never hear the roaches falling like fat rain, where never wife and children need go blinking through the gloom, where every room of many rooms will be full of room. Oh, my home may have its east or west, or north or south behind it. All I know is I shall know it and fight for it when I find it. It was in a bitter street of white that he made his application, for Rudolph Reed was oakener than others in the nation. The agent's steep and steady stare corroded to a grin, Why, you black old tough old hell of a man, move your family in. Nary a grin, grinned Rudolph Reed, nary a curse, cursed he, but moved in his house with his dark little wife and his dark little children 3. A neighbor would look with a yawning eye that squeezed into a slit, but the Rudolph Reeds and the children 3 were too joyous to notice it. For were they not firm in a home of their own, with windows everywhere, and a beautiful banistered stair, and a front yard for flowers and a backyard for grass? The first night, a rock, as big as 2 fists. The second, a rock big as 3. But nary a curse cursed Rudolph Reed, though oaken as a man could be. The third night, a silvery ring of glass patience ached to endure, but he looked, and lo! small Mabel's blood was staining her gaze so pure. Then up did rise our Rudolph Reed, and pressed the hand of his wife, and went to the door with a 34 and a beastly butcher's knife. He ran like a mad thing into the night, and the words in his mouth were stinking. By the time he had hurt his first white man, he was no longer thinking. By the time he had hurt his 4th white man, Rudolph Reed was dead. His neighbors gathered and kicked his corpse. His neighbors said, "Small Mabel whimpered all night long for calling herself the cause. Her oak-eyed mother did no thing but change the bloody gauze." In Gwendolyn Brooks's poem, The Ballad of Rudolph Reed, Brooks is demonstrating the common struggles a black family deals with when moving into a predominantly white neighborhood. The poem starts with the black family speaking about their dream house in the same way any other person of that time would. They want a large, clean, and structurally sound home. Upon finding this perfect house, the Reed family is initially too overjoyed to notice the angry stares of their white neighbors. Soon, the white community begins throwing rocks through the Reeds' windows, but when a glass is thrown into the house and injures one of Rudolph Reed's children, he decides to take revenge. Sadly, his attempt to protect his family results in his own death at the hands of the white neighbors, while Reed's wife can do nothing but change her child's bloody bandages. This story tells of how racial segregation and discrimination in America's white neighborhoods was underhandedly dealt with. Mostly, Brooks' poem shows the struggle blacks would encounter on a daily basis trying to incorporate into a white America. After reading about the early struggles Langston Hughes encountered with racism, the economic inequality he observed in his travels, but mostly in his own community of Harlem, and the unfair legal treatment of the poor and black citizens in America, I better understood his struggles to find a solution. Gwendolyn Brooks wrote about the same struggles, inequalities, and racist obstacles in her own poetry. Both poets demonstrate a frustration with the systems of the time. Hughes' poem was written over 20 years before Brooks's poem, but it seems that although time has moved forward, the thinking and struggles haven't. Both poets are basically dealing with one main idea: the conflict of moving out of the frying pan of the ghetto and into the fire of a white neighborhood. A second reading of these poems reinforced my own frustrations and disgust with racism and discrimination. It is a battle that has been raging on for centuries, and although the solution seems so simple, basic acceptance of humanity, unfortunately, these are topics we are still dealing with today. In modern terms, racism can be compared to COVID-19, in the sense it is easily spread through ignorance and selfishness. Until everyone can agree to do the same solution of a single human race, poets like Hughes and Brooks will always be relevant, but also a reminder to push for a better world through peace and acceptance of every race, color, nationality, sexuality, and gender. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.